My father abandoned me and my siblings 20 years ago, and now he's back, demanding I house his new wife and their 4 kids because he's going to prison and needs someone to take care of them. When my father left, I was just a kid, 16 years old, already dealing with way more than any teenager should, and his abandonment was the final blow. It wasn't just that he left us, my mom, me, and my 2 younger siblings. It was that he left us with nothing. No explanation, no money, no plan. One day he was there. The next he was gone, and we were left to pick up the pieces. For a long time, I wondered what had happened. Why had he suddenly decided that we weren't worth sticking around for? We had our issues, sure, but what family didn't? I spent years trying to understand, thinking that maybe I could have done something differently. Maybe I could have been better, done better. But in the end, I realized that some people are just selfish. Some people care more about themselves than anyone else. And my father was one of those people. We never heard from him again. No calls, no letters, nothing. He was just a ghost, a painful reminder of the man who was supposed to protect us but chose to run instead. My mom struggled to hold everything together, working 2 jobs, barely scraping by to keep us fed and housed. I had to step up, take care of my siblings, make sure they had someone to lean on. I didn't have the luxury of being a kid anymore. My childhood ended the day my father walked out that door. Fast forward 20 years, and I've got my life together. I'm 36 now, with a steady job and a place of my own. My siblings are both grown, doing their own thing, and while we're not rich by any means, we built ourselves up from nothing. We survived, thrived even without him. But then, just when I thought the past was behind me, a bombshell hit. It was a random Tuesday afternoon when I got the call, a voice I didn't recognize at first, scratchy, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. "It's your dad," he said, and my heart stopped. At first I thought it was some kind of sick joke. "Dad?" I repeated incredulously. "You've got to be kidding me." "I know it's been a long time," he continued, ignoring the obvious tension in my voice. "But I need your help." I laughed bitterly. "Help? After 20 years you come back asking for help?" "I don't have anyone else," he said, his tone almost pleading. "I'm in a bad situation." "Yeah, well, you left us in a pretty bad situation too," I snapped. "Why should I give a damn about whatever mess you've gotten yourself into now?" "I'm going to prison," he said bluntly, and I froze. "I've made some mistakes, but I'm turning myself in. The thing is, I've got a new family now. A wife, 4 kids. They need somewhere to stay, and I don't have anyone else." My blood boiled. "You've got to be kidding me. You want me to take care of the family you abandoned us for? After all these years?" "They didn't do anything wrong," he said, his voice shaking. "It's not their fault. They don't have anywhere to go. Please, I'm begging you." It took everything in me not to slam the phone down. "You think after all this time, after what you did to us, that I'm just going to swoop in and save your new family? The one you chose over us?" "I didn't choose him over you," he said quietly. Things got complicated." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my temper in check. "Complicated? That's your excuse?" "I know I can't make up for what I did," he continued, "but I'm asking for your help. For them, they're innocent." I didn't say anything for a long moment, letting the silence drag on. My mind was spinning. The man who abandoned us, who left us to fend for ourselves without a second thought, was now asking me to take care of his new family. The audacity of it was staggering. "You've got some nerve," I finally said. "Why the hell would I help you after everything you put us through?" "Because you're not like me," he said quietly. "You're better than that." I hung up the phone. After that phone call, I was livid. My father, the man who disappeared from my life without a trace, thought he could just waltz back in and dump his problems on me. The audacity of it was too much to wrap my head around, and the worst part? A small part of me couldn't let it go. As much as I hated to admit it, his words kept echoing in my mind. They didn't do anything wrong. They're innocent. For a couple of days, I tried to shake it off, but it was like a thorn that wouldn't stop digging deeper into my skin. The more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. What were those kids supposed to do? What if it were my siblings and me, stuck in a situation we didn't create, with nowhere to go? As much as I hated my father for what he did to us, I couldn't hold those kids responsible for his failures. But that didn't mean I was ready to forgive him, not by a long shot. Then the texts started coming in, one from my father's new wife, Laura. At first, I didn't even know how she got my number. I hadn't even known her name until she texted me, asking if we could talk. I ignored it. Then another text came, then another. Each one was a variation of the same message. Please, I know it's asking a lot, but my kids don't deserve to be homeless. I wanted to scream at her, at both of them. I had my own life to deal with, my job, my responsibilities, and they were dragging me back into a world I thought I'd escaped years ago. But I couldn't ignore it forever. The messages kept coming, and they wore me down. One evening, I finally texted her back, "Fine, we can talk." We met at a coffee shop downtown. I didn't know what I was expecting, but the woman who showed up wasn't anything like I imagined. Laura, 35F, looked tired, frazzled even, like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red, and her face was drawn tight with worry. She sat down across from me, clutching a worn-out purse in her lap. "I know this is awkward," she began, her voice soft, "and I'm sorry for reaching out like this. I can't imagine what you must be thinking about us, about your dad." I stared at her, not saying a word, let her talk. "I had no idea what he did," she said, her voice shaking. "He never told me about you or your siblings, not until recently. I'm so sorry. I can't undo what he did. But I swear, if I had known," she trailed off, her eyes glistening with tears. I wanted to feel something for her, some kind of sympathy, but it just wasn't there. I had my walls up, and they weren't coming down. "I don't care about you or him," I said bluntly, cutting her off. "What I care about is why you think it's my responsibility to fix this mess." Her eyes widened, and she bit her lip. I don't know if it's your responsibility," she admitted. We don't have anywhere else to turn. He's going to prison, and I'm going to lose everything. The house, our savings, it's all tied up in his mess. I have 4 kids, and I don't know where we're going to go." "You're asking me to take in 4 kids I've never met," I said, my voice cold. "Do you even realize how insane that sounds?" She nodded, wiping at her eyes. I know it's asking too much, but I'm desperate. They didn't do anything wrong. They didn't ask for this." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of her words settling on me. It wasn't fair. None of this was fair. "Why don't you ask your family?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Surely someone on your side can help you." Her face crumpled. "I don't have anyone. My parents passed away years ago. My brother's out of the picture. He's got his own problems. It's just me and the kids." I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. This wasn't my problem. I shouldn't even be here, listening to this. "They'll be put in foster care," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I can't find somewhere for them, that's what'll happen. They'll be split up, sent God knows where." My stomach twisted. Foster care? I had seen how that system worked. Kids lost in the shuffle, bounced from home to home, separated from their siblings, often treated like burdens. It wasn't a life, and these kids, they were just collateral damage in my father's screwed-up life. I opened my eyes, looking at Laura, who was now staring at me like I was her last hope. "And what about my father?" I asked, my voice low. "You expect me to just forgive him after what he did?" Her lips quivered. "I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm just asking you to help the kids." I left the coffee shop with Laura's words ringing in my ears. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, but what she was asking for felt just as impossible. Taken 4 kids who weren't mine, whose father had walked out on me and my siblings without so much as a goodbye. It was like asking me to relive the worst moments of my childhood, except this time, I was supposed to be the one playing hero. I couldn't stop thinking about it, though. Over the next few days, I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to imagine what life would look like if I said yes. I didn't even know what kind of people these kids were. For all I knew, they could be nightmares, a reminder of everything that had gone wrong in my life. But every time I convinced myself that saying no was the right choice, I pictured them being torn apart in foster care, shuffled around like unwanted baggage. That thought made me feel sick. On the other hand, agreeing to this meant opening up old wounds I'd spent years trying to heal. How was I supposed to look after my father's kids when I still hadn't forgiven him for what he did to me? The resentment I had toward him ran deep, a thick, impenetrable wall that I'd built over decades. And now suddenly, here I was being asked to bulldoze that wall for the sake of 4 strangers. My siblings had opinions too, and they weren't shy about sharing them. I hadn't told them the full story yet, just that Dad had contacted me and asked for help. "You're not seriously considering helping him, are you?" My brother, Lucas, 29M, asked when I brought it up during dinner one night. His face was a mask of disbelief, like he couldn't fathom that I'd even entertain the idea. "I don't know," I replied, pushing food around my plate, not really hungry. "It's not for him. It's for the kids." My sister, Sophie, 26F, chimed in, her voice sharp. His kids, not your problem, not your responsibility. Let him clean up his own mess for once. Lucas nodded in agreement. He made his bed. Now he has to lie in it. I knew they were right. Rationally, I knew it. But something in me couldn't let go of the idea that maybe I could make a difference for these kids. It wasn't their fault. They didn't ask to be born into this chaos. Wouldn't you want someone to help us if we were in their shoes? I asked, surprising even myself with the question. Lucas scoffed. We're not in their shoes. We were abandoned. We didn't have anyone. Why should you step in now and pretend to be the savior for his new family? I didn't have an answer for that. Lucas and Sophie had been through the same hell as me, maybe even worse since they were younger when Dad left. They hadn't had the chance to build up the few memories of him I'd managed to salvage. They saw him as nothing more than a ghost who had haunted our lives, someone who showed up in our nightmares, but never in real life. You don't owe him anything, Sophie said, her tone softening as she reached across the table to take my hand. We've moved on. We've built lives without him. Don't let him drag you back into that darkness. I nodded, squeezing her hand, but I still wasn't sure what to do. The conversation ended, and I promised them I'd think it through. But the truth was, I already knew what my gut was telling me to do, even if I hated myself for it. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to block out the noise in my head. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about my father. It wasn't even about Laura. It was about me and whether I could live with myself if I walked away from those kids, knowing I could have helped them. The next morning, I made up my mind. I called Laura and told her we needed to meet again. When we sat down at the same coffee shop, her face was tense with anticipation. She probably thought I was going to shut her down. I couldn't blame her. I was about to do something I never thought I'd do. I'll do it, I said, my voice steady but my stomach in knots. I'll help the kids. Her face crumpled in relief, and for a moment I thought she might cry. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea what this means. I held up a hand. But I have conditions. She nodded quickly, wiping at her eyes. Of course, anything. First of all, this is temporary. I'm not signing up to raise these kids for the rest of their lives. I'll help until you can figure something else out. You'll need to start looking for other options. Family, friends, whatever. I'm not their permanent guardian. I understand, she said quickly. Second, I want full transparency. If I'm going to do this, I need to know everything. No more secrets, no more lies. I need to know exactly what's going on with my father, where the money's going, and what your situation really is. She swallowed hard, nodding. You'll have it. I'll tell you everything. And third, I added, narrowing my eyes at her, this doesn't mean I'm forgiving my father. I'm doing this for the kids. That's it. Laura nodded, her expression somber. I wouldn't expect you to forgive him. He's done terrible things. I know that. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision settling over both of us. When do they move in? I asked, my voice resigned. Tomorrow, she said softly, if that's okay. I closed my eyes, already regretting my decision, but knowing it was the right one. Tomorrow's fine. The next day came faster than I expected. Laura arrived at my house with the 4 kids in tow, along with an SUV packed with their belongings. I stood at the doorway, my arms crossed, watching as they filed out of the car one by one. The kids ranged in age from 3 to 10, and each of them wore the same expression, a mix of confusion, fear, and sadness. This is Emma, 10F, Jason, 8M, Killy, 6F, and Noah, 3M. Laura said, introducing them quickly as if we were at some kind of awkward family reunion. Kids, this is, this is someone who's going to help us out for a little while. The kids barely looked at me, their eyes downcast as they clung to Laura's side. I felt a pang of sympathy for them, even though I resented the situation. They were caught in the middle of a mess they didn't create, and I knew that better than anyone. Still, I wasn't prepared for how hard this was going to hit me. Hi, I said awkwardly, giving a small wave. I'm here to help. Laura shot me a grateful look, but it did nothing to ease the tension between us. I showed them inside, leading them through the house to the guest room I had hastily prepared the night before. It wasn't much, just a few spare beds and some toys I had dug out of storage, but it was better than nothing. As they settled in, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what I'd agreed to. These kids had just lost their father to prison, and now they were being uprooted again to live with a complete stranger. And me? I was being forced to play the role of caretaker for my father's new family, a family I had never asked for. After getting the kids settled, I went downstairs to talk to Laura. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped as she sipped on a glass of water at the kitchen table. "This is temporary," I reminded her, more for my own sake than hers. "I'll help for now, but you need to start looking for other options." She nodded, her eyes tired and sad. "I will, I promise. It's just, everything happened so fast. I don't know where else to turn." I wanted to be angry with her, but the truth was, she looked just as lost as the kids. She was in way over her head, just like me. That first night was rough. The kids were restless, not used to their new surroundings, and I could hear them crying in their room. I tried to ignore it at first, but after an hour of tossing and turning, I finally got up and went to check on them. Emma, the oldest, was trying to comfort her younger siblings, but it was clear she was struggling. She looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, and something inside me broke. "Do you need help?" I asked quietly, stepping into the room. Emma hesitated for a moment before nodding. I sat down on the edge of one of the beds and did my best to soothe the younger ones. Kylie, the 6-year-old, had curled up in a ball, clutching a stuffed animal to her chest, while Noah, the 3-year-old, whimpered softly, his thumb in his mouth. I stayed with them for a while, talking to them in hushed tones until they eventually drifted off to sleep. Emma was the last to fall asleep, her eyes never leaving mine, as if she was waiting for me to abandon them, just like her father had. When I finally left the room, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I had spent so long resenting my father and everything he represented. But these kids, they didn't deserve my anger. They were innocent, caught in the crossfire of a situation they had no control over. The next few days were a blur of adjusting to this new reality. I had to figure out a way to balance my own life with the sudden responsibility of caring for 4 kids. My job became more challenging, especially with the kids home all day. They needed attention, meals, structure, and a lot of reassurance that everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure myself. Laura did her best to help out, but it was clear she was struggling too. She was trying to hold everything together, juggling visits to my father in prison with looking for a more permanent solution for the kids. But the tension between us was palpable. Every time she left the house, I wondered if she'd come back, or if she'd decide this was all too much and leave me to handle it on my own. One afternoon, while I was helping Jason with his homework, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "How's it going with Dad's kids?" she asked, the skepticism clear even through the text. I hesitated before replying. "It's harder than I thought." "Then why are you doing it?" she texted back. I stared at the screen for a long moment, unsure how to answer that. Why was I doing it? Was it because of guilt? A sense of obligation? Or was it something deeper, something I didn't want to admit to myself? I put my phone down without responding, my thoughts swirling. The truth was, I didn't have a good answer. Every day felt like a struggle between resentment and responsibility, and I was constantly on the edge of losing it. But then there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when I saw the impact I was having. Like the time Noah fell and scraped his knee, and instead of crying for his mom, he came to me. Or the time Emma shyly asked if I could help her with a school project, her eyes bright with hope that I wouldn't let her down. Those moments gave me strength, even if they were rare, but they also reminded me of the stakes. I was walking a fine line between helping these kids and losing myself in the process, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep it up. The breaking point came about 2 weeks after the kids had moved in. Laura hadn't shown up for a few days, and I was starting to worry. I tried calling her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. The kids were starting to ask questions, and I didn't have any answers for them. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a man standing there, someone I didn't recognize. He was tall, with a serious expression and a clipboard in hand. "Hi, I'm from Child Protective Services," he said, his voice formal. "We've received a report about the children in your care." The words from the man at the door sent a chill down my spine. Child Protective Services? A report? I immediately glanced back inside at the kids, who were sitting in the living room, unaware of the storm that was about to hit us. My heart raced as I turned back to the man. "There must be some mistake," I stammered. "I'm taking care of them. Their mother, Laura, she's been in and out, but I'm doing everything I can." The man didn't seem surprised by my response. He clearly heard this kind of thing before. He nodded slowly, flipping through his clipboard before meeting my eyes. "We've received a report that the children may not be in a stable environment," he said carefully, his words measured. It was filed anonymously. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. An anonymous report? Who the hell would do this? Who even knew about the kids staying with me? Sophie? No, she wouldn't. She might disapprove, but she wouldn't go that far. My mind raced through possibilities, and then it hit me, Laura. The thought made me feel sick. Was this her way of bailing out on her own kids? Did she think this was the easy way out? The man was still talking, explaining the process and how CPS had to investigate every claim. But my mind was spinning. How could she? How could Laura just abandon them like this? We'll need to do a quick walkthrough of the home and talk to the children, he continued, his tone firm but not unkind, just to make sure everything is in order. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. Of course. I led him through the house, showing him the kids' room, the kitchen, and everything else he asked for. Meanwhile, the kids were starting to notice that something was wrong. Emma, the oldest, was watching me with wide, worried eyes, while the younger ones stayed huddled together on the couch, sensing the tension in the air. When the CPS worker finally finished his inspection, he sat down with the kids, asking them a few questions about how they were doing, how they liked staying here, and if there was anything they needed. I watched from a distance, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for the verdict. After what felt like an eternity, the man stood up and walked back over to me. Everything seems fine here, he said, though his voice carried an underlying tone of caution. For now, we'll leave the children in your care, but we'll be following up to make sure everything continues to go smoothly. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thank you, I whispered. He gave me a nod and left, leaving me standing in the middle of my living room, overwhelmed by the whirlwind of emotions. The kids were staring at me now, clearly confused and scared. What's going on? Emma asked softly, her voice trembling. I knelt down in front of them, trying to keep my own emotions in check. There was a mistake, I said gently. Someone reported that you weren't being taken care of, but it's all sorted now. You're staying with me. Emma didn't seem convinced, but she nodded, her lips pressed into a tight line. She was trying to be brave for the younger ones, and my heart ached for her. Later that night, after the kids were finally asleep, I sat down at the kitchen table, my head in my hands. I couldn't shake the anger and betrayal I felt toward Laura. How could she put her own children in this position? How could she turn her back on them like that? I reached for my phone and dialed her number again, but once again, it went straight to voicemail. I was done playing nice. I left her a message this time, my voice cold with barely contained rage. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Laura, but you'd better get your act together. If you think you can just abandon your kids and leave me to clean up your mess, you're wrong. I'm not going to let you walk away from this. I hung up, feeling no relief. In fact, the weight of everything felt heavier than ever. The next few days were tense. CPS hadn't come back yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they followed up. The kids were starting to settle in more, but the uncertainty hung over us like a dark cloud. Every time the phone rang, my stomach twisted, expecting the worst. Then, out of the blue, Laura showed up at my door one evening. I could tell just by looking at her that she was panicked. Her hair was a mess, her clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes darted nervously around as if she was being followed. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharp. "I thought you were done with all of this." Laura pushed past me into the house, her eyes wild. "You don't understand," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder as if someone was lurking behind her. "It's not safe for the kids. It's not safe for me." "What the hell are you talking about?" I demanded, my patience wearing thin. She turned to me, her eyes wide and desperate. "I didn't file that CPS report," she said, her voice shaking. "It was your father. He's trying to get custody of the kids from prison. He's trying to take them from us." I froze, the words not making sense at first. "What? How could he? He's in prison." Laura shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "He still has connections. He's manipulating the system, pulling strings. He wants the kids with his side of the family, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to get them." A cold realization washed over me. My father had abandoned me and my siblings all those years ago, but now he was back, trying to sink his claws into my life once again through his new family, and I had walked right into his trap, thinking I was doing the right thing by taking care of the kids. "How do I stop him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Laura bit her lip, looking more scared than ever. "We have to fight back. Together, it's the only way." The last thing I wanted was to team up with Laura, but I knew she was right. My father was a master manipulator, and if we didn't stand together, he'd win. And those kids, innocent as they were, would be lost in the crossfire. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the fight ahead. I wasn't going to let my father destroy another family, not mine and not these kids. It was time to end this once and for all.